Welcome everybody to Endgame with Vail. I'm Vail, and today we're going to be looking at, or starting a new series here on Endgame and looking at the principles and doing some problems in order to get better and stronger at our endgame. So we might ask, why are we focusing on endgame? Well, as I mentioned in a previous video, endgame is useful to study because of three reasons. One, nobody else does it. It's very rare for amateurs to spend a lot of time studying endgame. Of course, that's not a guarantee, but for the most part, studying endgame is going to give you a lot of bang for your buck. So if you want to study something that will give you an edge in amateur games, studying endgame is where it's at. Also, there are other long-term practical benefits to studying your endgame. One is that you get really familiar with Sente and Gote, knowing what that means, seeing where to find it. So you've got an area of study that's not well used by, or not well studied by amateurs, and you have a really good practical reason. Learning Sente, Gote moves, it'll give you um, practice in reading and calculating values, and that's part of Sente, knowing what your opponent has to respond to. And then finally, it gives you kind of a holistic view of how the board develops. So it'll give you an understanding of how to get to certain points in the end game or throughout the whole course of the game. And that will help with things like Co. So knowing when to save or when to take a particular move so that you can have it as an end game threat later in the game. That's something that you're not going to know unless you've studied endgame. Now, I'm not a master at endgame. I'm going to be using this channel to go through the principles and problems that I have access to with various books and try to get better myself, because I think I did it wrong when I was studying Go the first time, and I want to use this channel as a way to study up in the best way that I think is possible. So we've got a lot of information to go into today, so I want to get this going as fast as possible. Get your pause button and your backup 10 seconds button ready, because I'm going to be moving through it quickly. First off, we want to talk about, especially our target audience here is Q level. I'm Q, 8Q, about 7Q. And so this is kind of targeted towards beginning-ish players, 15 to 20Q. So I know when I was that level, I didn't really know when Endgame started. I didn't really know what it was about. And learning about it, it seemed very mathy and kind of boring. So I didn't spend a lot of time doing it. So the way I like to think of Endgame and actually the various uh, parts of a Go game is kind of like a writing project. When you begin a writing project, you start with an outline, and that's really what the opening is. You're sketching out ideas. You're just putting out stones on the board, trying to, um, oops, wrong one, trying to, I did it again. I erased the whole everything. Okay, I'm not going to worry about that. Trying to, get an idea for where you think territory is going to be. Not playing any aggressive moves really. Um, Playing moves that you see here. We're just trying to get a general idea of where the territory is, versus something along the lines of middle game. Now, middle game is is more like the rough draft period of the game when or of a writing project, when you're taking your ideas and you're actually putting them down on paper and you're trying to figure out what works, what doesn't, and put something out there. Get content that is readable. And during that time period, you might have whole sections that you decide to discard, or whole new areas that you decide you're going to write into your story. So likewise, during the middle game period, you are taking that outline that you wrote and you're making territory with it. You're doing something with it that makes it solid. And during the course of that period, you might lose sections. Um, hopefully not enough to lose you the game, because here's the kicker: the difference is that the story you're trying to tell is the story of your own victory during that particular game, and you have an opponent who has the exact opposite goal for his story. So you both can't tell the same story, which brings me to a very important point about Go. Go is a zero-sum game. So you there's only a set number of points that can be had on the Go board, and if you get them, your opponent is not going to get them. Now, this is going to come up again in our discussion of Endgame throughout this whole series. So bear in mind that when you get points, you are literally taking them from your opponent. So in the sense that they will not have those points. It's interesting thinking about that. Makes you also think about uh, Sente as well, because if a player plays something like um, even this early move. Now, this isn't necessarily a good move, but even something like this, Black has made an extension or made an enclosure and an extension from that enclosure. You might actually say it's better to do, for the purposes of this, it's better to go here. This is an ideal extension from an enclosure. Uh, Now, this looks like more solid territory than what White has built up. So, in a very, very general sense, a person could say that this move is Sente, in the sense that now Black, it's incumbent upon Black to make up the difference in territory, because this is a zero-sum game, because you can't both tell your story at the same time. Black has just told a story where Black gets all of this territory. Now White has to make that up somewhere. So in that kind of sense, that's very loosely, you could think of that as Sente. It does actually happen where a player will take a large move, not an urgent move, not something, not an attacking move necessarily, just taking points, and that instantly puts the other player on defensive, because now they have to, or actually puts them on attack, because they have to make that up. Now they're behind, so they have to respond accordingly. That's what Sente is all about. So in the middle game, you are fighting over your plot points, basically, of your story that you're trying to tell. You are defining territory. You are making that territory solid. Now, Endgame, and the purpose of this video series, Endgame, you could think of that as editing. So Endgame is all about shoring up the edges. Let's go back and do that again. Shoring up edges of the board. So take a look at this, for instance. In this, you have, let's assume that there's stones. Everything else is delineated. You've got a group of white stones butt up against a group of black stones. And the question is, whose territory is this? We don't know. So we have to try to figure that out by play. And this is Endgame. This is what Endgame is all about. These groups aren't going to necessarily die. Let's assume they're not going to. But we don't know the details of how many points we get. Now, the reason that studying Endgame is so valuable is because if you know your endgame and your opponent doesn't, you can swing 20 points sometimes. I mean, maybe that would be a lot, but you can get about 20, 15, 20 points. Swing that in the end of the game. Most Don level players that I've talked to, they say that if they're 5 points ahead, they feel safe. They feel like they're going to win the game. Now, I'm not nearly that good, but if I am 20 points ahead, I'm feeling pretty confident in my ability to win that game. So if you can swing 15 or 20 points in just an endgame versus an opponent who doesn't know how to respond correctly, then you can win many games, even games that you think you might have lost. So having a strong endgame is really worth the trouble to study. So let's examine this, for instance. Go back to our stones. Let's say that black plays first. White responds. Black needs to connect. Okay. So what we've done here is we have cut off, we've reduced white's territory and gained a little bit for black. How much? There are two things that we need to know when examining endgame positions. Number one is, what is the value of the move? How much is a move worth? And two, what is the category of the move? There are 4 categories of moves that we're going to look at through the course of this series. So first, let's look at how to calculate basic endgame values. In this, black has Haned and jumped in. Now you might say white can now Hane back. Black would Atari. White connects. What does this leave us? This leaves us these points that that are blacks, that weren't necessarily before he made this endgame move. How so? Well, if we go back to the original position, what if white did it? I'm sorry, pass. What if white goes first? Black blocks, white connects, black Hanes, white Ataris, black connects. And now we see that this territory is white's, whereas it wasn't before. Do you see the difference? Here's black when black moved first. Here's white when white moved first. See how it's switching back and forth? So you might say, aha, well, it's worth 2 points. No, it's worth 4 points in this scenario because you have to add up both values because it's a zero-sum game. White in this board got 2 points, but took away the potential for black to get those 2 points that we're looking at now. So it's 4 points. However, there's more to it than that. Because after black plays this move, we don't know what's going to be played next. This was big enough where white had to respond. That's what Sente is. It was a necessary response. However, white might not make that next move. White might not play here. There might be something bigger on the board. So eventually, black might get a chance to play here at H19 instead, which would look like that. We don't know. So what we do instead is we assume that each one drops down. We split the difference. So this is more accurately what we would be looking at. Now black got 3 points for doing that. And when white plays first, we're not going to assume that black is going to play that because we don't know what the whole rest of the board looks like. We are going to split the difference and assume that they just descend, in which case white would get these 3 points. So now it looks like this versus this. And realizing that we add the values together to calculate how important the original move was, that means that this move or this move is worth 6 points. So that's how you calculate values. Now I want to say something real briefly about that. This kind of move is so common that what I do, and this is a Q move, as we get better together, hopefully, we will be able to calculate all of the different endgame positions and values independently and know exactly what they cost. However, I use a little trick where, because this kind of move is so common, I assume that giving your opponent Sente will allow them to make a 6-point move in Endgame. Okay, I'm going to say that again. So I assume as a cue, and I'm going to be weaning myself off this through the course of the series, but I assume that if I start a series of moves that ends in gote, let's say something like this, where white starts and it ends with white's sente, that effectively white's sente, now when white goes next, that move, wherever white goes, I'm going to assume that move is going to cost black, or is going to be worth 6 points. That it's going to cost black 6 points, or gain white 6 points. So we'll use that shorthand through the next part of what we're going to talk about. So that's how you calculate endgame values. And the most common endgame move is going to be around 6 points. That is a vast simplification of how endgame actually works. There can be huge moves in endgame, but the average move is around 6 points. Okay, now we need to look at different categories of moves. So let me grab my trusty book, and we will take a look at the categories. Now that we know how to do the first thing, which is calculate value of a move, now we need to find out the 4 different categories of endgame moves. And so here, the first one is going to be called double sente. And you may have noticed that I foolishly erased all of my pre-made scenarios again. It's the second time I've done that. So I got to rebuild them. So here we go. What is the value of white playing here versus black playing here? Well, real roughly, we see that we could estimate it at about 6 points. It might be a little less, but we can estimate it at about 6. So if that's a 6 value, now what category is this? Well, notice that we're dealing with a 2 moves here. This move has to be responded to by black. Otherwise, white gets to go into his territory and reduce him. Vice versa, white needs to respond to black's move. Otherwise, black will go into white's territory and take away quite a few points. So this move is sente for both black and for white. Therefore, it's a double sente move. Whoever gets to go here first will keep sente. That's really important. This is the most valuable category of endgame move that there is. Notice that when black responds, white can go under and hane. Black needs to respond again. White has to connect, and black needs to connect. So white comes out of this with sente and with about 2 to 3 or 4 to 6 points in swing. Contrast that with the other option where black plays first, and the same thing happens. So it ends with black's sente. Okay, once again, this is a gote move because this group is alive. Whereas if black passes, this is also a gote move. None of them need to be responded to, so therefore they are both considered gote, which is the lowest category. So up at the top, we've got double sente as the most valuable and gote as the least valuable. Sente is easy. It's just a sequence that ends with the initiative of whoever started the sequence. Then we have reverse sente, which looks like this. You'll notice most of these are extremely similar. All right, so if we look at this move is again exactly like the other move that we saw um, here or here. It's Gote for black. This is again Gote for black. However, if we go back one and take a look at this move is Sente for white. Therefore, this making a move that blocks white is considered reverse Sente. It would end in Gote for black. However, doing it removes a Sente move. Making this move removes a Sente move from, even though this is as well as Gote as well, would remove a Sente move from white later. So, and again, we're just talking about a value here of about 5 or 6 points, 4 to 6 points. So we know how to calculate moves. We know the order of moves. And what we want to do now is figure out how much, when should we make certain moves. What I like to do is I like to, when I'm looking at a finished Go board, when all the fighting's done and we're just doing the editing part, we're just wrapping it up, start at the bottom. Find the Gote moves first. And if you find a Gote move that is worth 6 points or more, bump it up into the next category. Bump it up into the reverse Sente category. Like treat that almost like it's reverse Sente, because if your sequence ends in Gote, then you're basically giving your opponent a 6-point move, roughly on average. So if there is a Gote move that you can make that is more valuable than 6 points, maybe treat it like the next category up, like a reverse Sente move. And then just find all the reverse Sente moves and do the same thing. Are there any there that are going to get you, that have a swing value, a value of 6 points or more? If there are, bump them up one more level to a Sente move. Treat them as though they're Sente, and do the same thing all the way up to double Sente. Typically, you want to, and then go back down in reverse and take the moves that are in the double Sente category, then take the moves that are in the Sente, reverse Sente, and Gote categories in order. And when you do that, you'll, with a rough estimate, you'll be effectively taking the moves that are the most valuable in the correct order. Now, that was a lot of material to cover, and I apologize for the mistakes that I made in deleting all of my information. But let's review real fast. So, Sente, let me back up even more. We reach Endgame when we find that all of the territory has pretty much been delineated, and we just need to shore up the edges. We look for those edges literally on the edge of the board. Most of your endgame moves are going to be on the edges of the board, third, second, and first line moves. Then, once endgame has begun, you need to know how to calculate those moves. And we use a swing method of calculating, which will look, this is a reminder. So that's actually this is about 3 points for black versus 3 points for white. That means this original move here for white, that's worth 6 points. Then, knowing the value of each move, then you have to find out what the category is. There are 4 categories, and they are double Sente, in which no, that's not the right one. Yeah. Double Sente. Here we go. in which whoever plays first is going to take Sente in that area. That's the most valuable. Notice if black if white plays here first, then black has to respond. Versus if black plays there first, then white needs to respond. So those are the most valuable. Then you move on to Sente moves, in which whoever starts the sequence gets to retain Sente. Then you move on to reverse Sente moves, which are one side will end in Gote, but the person who would get Sente would get such a huge amount from what they do that you want to stop it. So if you see how that there were 3 on one side, of 3 points on one side for our initial example here, uh, if this was not equal, if it was, sorry, if it was like 3 for white on one side but like 20 on the other, that is going to be a reverse Sente move where black needs to stop white from getting that move, even though it ends in Gote for him. So that's what reverse Sente is. And then finally Gote, where whoever starts the sequence, it will end up with their opponent having Sente. You want to take these in this order, but the easiest way to categorize your moves once you've calculated the values is look for all the Gote moves. Start with Gote. Find the things that are going to end with you in Gote. If there are any that have a value by taking that move, a point value of 6 or higher, then bump it up into the reverse Sente move category. Then look at all those. If there's any that are 6 or higher, bump those up into the Sente category and go all the way up to double Sente. So that's my method. Now, as this method of reversing it and using 6 points as the baseline, we are not going to be using that this whole time. From now on, the videos that we're going to be looking at are just going to be much shorter than this one, thankfully. But they're going to be problems and principles, and we're going to work through endgame problems together. And we are going to improve over time. And hopefully that will affect all of our game, especially our ability to win in tournaments, which, good news, I'll be able to start doing some tournaments again shortly. So stay tuned for that. And thank you for sticking with me on this. And there will be many more videos to come in the 3 different playlists. We've got reviews, we have life and death problems, and we have endgame problems. So I look forward to seeing you again next time. Until then, take care.